Hi guys, I'm Robert Coons. Welcome to Qigong Project. So I want to tell you about the project that I'm undertaking, which is going to take up the bulk of this channel's content in the near to mid future. It's called 81 Months of the Dao De Jing. And basically, I've decided to spend the next 81 months reading the Dao De Jing chapter by chapter. So one chapter per month, being that the Dao De Jing has 81 sections or 81 chapters, however you want to call it. Um, and not just that though, right? Because probably you've all read the Dao De Jing. I've read the Dao De Jing. Everybody's read the Dao De Jing. What I would like to do is try to understand it better. And so I've decided that I'm going to dedicate 1 month to each chapter in a structured way in order to facilitate a better understanding of the Dao De Jing. And I'm going to be studying it myself. I'm going to be facilitating some classes about it, especially the relationship between Dao De Jing and internal alchemy and Dao De Jing and philosophy. And I'm going to be sharing, obviously, some public content here as well. The basic idea of the program, or the basic structure, is going to be actually, it's already started. So it is going through the Dao De Jing chapter by chapter, and each week of each month. So I'm defining a month as 4 weeks. I understand that some months have 5 weeks, but we have to have some basic definitions here. Each week, I will look at a different aspect of an individual chapter of the Dao De Jing. So, as an example, week one just concluded last weekend. During that week, I looked at the first chapter of the Dao De Jing in order to establish a basic, reliable translation for it, to understand etymological characteristics of individual pictographs used in the chapter, and also to try to make an analysis of the meaning of the chapter. So the first week is going to be mainly about the chapter. Now, the edition I'm choosing is approximately similar to Wang Bi's edition. I understand there's various ones out there, but I'm just going to pick that one and go with it. The next week is going to be about reading early annotations of the Dao De Jing. So there's 2.5 that I've picked out. One is the Wang Bi annotation. So this was for a long time considered as the gold standard of Dao De Jing annotations. It's a philosophical annotation. It was written toward the end of the Han Dynasty, or maybe just in that sort of like inter-dynasty period, by a person named Wang Bi, who was from a long historied family of literati, basically. I'm also going to be reading the He Gong commentary, so that's a slightly earlier one, written by a mysterious individual who is called He Gong, or the Riverside Elder. It's more about internal cultivation. And then the half will be the Xiang'er commentary, because Xiang'er, which is commonly associated with the Heavenly Teachers sect, an early Taoist sect, a religious sect, is only partial. So, for instance, we don't have chapter 1; it starts at chapter 3, and so we'll be looking at that text from what's available to us, and so that'll be the main work for week 2. In week 3, I'm going to be looking at Dao De Jing's text. I'm sorry, Huang Yuanji's text, Dao De Jing Chanwei. Dao De Jing Chanwei, or Dao De Jing Jiangyi, is a Ming Dynasty, Qing Dynasty, probably internal alchemy text, which is the only full annotation of the Dao De Jing which is on the topic of internal alchemy. So there's many annotations of the Dao De Jing, but only one of them is completely dedicated to internal alchemy practice. And so it's a very special book. And so we'll be reading chapters of that during the 3rd week. And then in the 4th week, I'm going to be looking at modern resources about the Dao De Jing and its meaning, especially using certain popular mainland Chinese websites, like the website Wuqianyan, 5,000 Words, which is exclusively dedicated to disseminating the meaning of the Dao De Jing from the modern perspective. So basically, month by month, going to be looking at approximately at those resources. I'm making the project flexible enough to allow other things to come in when it's appropriate. But that's the basic idea. And 81 months is quite a while. And I'm going to try my best to see the whole thing through. This is not unprecedented. Previously, a group, including myself and a couple of other friends, read the Dao De Jing and the Dao De Jing Chanwei over the course of about 4 years. So we started in 2020 and we finished in 2024. And so multi-year project related to the Dao De Jing is certainly something I've done before. I want to do it again in order to come to better understand the text. Of course, I'd rather put a year into each chapter, but I'm 43 years old now, and although I'm working very, very hard on longevity meditation, I can't guarantee that I'll last 81 years. So probably better to expedite the process into 81 months rather than 81 years, although, wish me luck, okay? Who knows, maybe with the improvement in medical technology in the future, we'll really achieve immortality. But until then, let's be a little bit more humble in our predictions. Okay, so this week, I'm just introducing the idea on YouTube. Here's my plan for YouTube. I don't really have a plan. The plan for YouTube is basically I'm going to make a couple videos a month talking about topics related to each chapter of the Dao De Jing, and it's going to coincide with my studies. I don't necessarily want to call it research. I'm not a professional academic. My hobby is internal alchemy, and I like reading Taoist philosophy books. I have enough experience in both of those areas to be able to talk about it convincingly. Does that mean I'm right? Not necessarily. Does it mean that I'm always wrong? Probably not. A guy who likes this genre, and hopefully if you like these videos and you listen to them or watch them, then hopefully they're beneficial to you. But that's approximately what's going to happen. I'm going to put some stuff on YouTube. I'm writing on Substack. I've already written a couple articles there, so I'll link to that in the description, which you can access below. But this week I thought what I would do is introduce you to the name of the text, Dao De Jing, and I made a little, is it a PDF? I guess it's saved in a PDF format. Eventually I will set up a web page for this project, and I'll put PDFs there for download. But for the time being, I don't have that. I'm busy with other things. Okay, so you can see here it says 81 months of the Dao De Jing. Introduction. What's in a name? Okay, I've got a picture of the sun and the moon, hypothetically hanging over West Lake in Hangzhou. That's what I asked ChatGPT to make for me. I'm not an artist. I'm a hack at music, but I don't do art. So Chat has graciously helped me with this. Okay, so we're going to look at the three characters in the name Dao De Jing, but we're especially going to focus on Dao and De, and we're going to focus a little less on Jing. Now, let me just see how my highlighter works. Okay, it works, cool. So we're going to talk about the character, and we're going to highlight individual sections of it so that we can come to perhaps understand it a little bit better. Okay, so the first part of the character in Dao De Jing is this left side aspect. And you can see it's a little longer, right? It runs under, okay? But this part here, it's pronounced, I think it's pronounced chuo. That's how I've seen it written in pinyin or like romanization, chuo, chuo. It means to travel or be carried from one place to another. So it indicates a kind of movement. The next character, this one you can break it down in different ways, but approximately it's the character shou. Shou means the head of something or the leader, right? So like often it's used as the head or the foremost or the front of something. So if we take a most basic interpretation of the character Dao, which by the way is pronounced like this if you read pinyin, right? De a o Dao, Dao. So I'm not good at tones, but it's the fourth tone anyway. So Dao. Anyway, if you take a very, very, very basic interpretation of the term Dao, it means the leader or the head or the first thing being carried somewhere. And so this is maybe not as fancy as the religious interpretations of the character, but I think it's a good working definition to start with. The term Dao infers the beginning of something, the first movement of something, the time before something comes into being, which then causes it to come into being, right? So in a certain sense, it's talking about the beginning of creation, the beginning of the universe, the beginning of heaven and earth, the time before that, right? The time before that is called Dao, and it puts the beginning into play, right? So it's that great original mover. I don't like to equivocate um, with science because number one, I don't have a sufficient understanding of science, right? I have only a very, very basic grasp of things like biology and physiology and anatomy that come from having to take some medical courses during my acupuncture training. But you know, I don't, I'm not qualified to talk about science. But we could say in terms of creating a meaning um, that this could be compared in a philosophical sense to the time before the Big Bang. So before the Big Bang occurs, uh, assuming that the Big Bang is what created the universe, right? We don't have to necessarily make that assumption, but if we make that assumption, then we'll use this as a philosophical uh, sort of comparison. Then the Tao is that state before the Big Bang, and then it creates reality, and reality is made up essentially of yin and yang. So if you go to the time before the Dao De Jing, the first reference to what the Dao is, by the way, Dao means thoroughfare or road or pathway. So if you were like in Shanghai, for instance, you can go to Shiji Da Dao, right? The like the great the great thoroughfare of the modern world. Is a big road in Shanghai, for instance, right? So Dao is a frequently used Chinese word even today, and it doesn't always have a philosophical or religious or internal cultivation meaning. Sometimes it just means road. But the idea is the Dao is this road that sets out reality before us, and in the earliest sort of explanation of what Dao means in the I Ching, it says yi yin yi yang wei zhi Dao. So one yin and one yang is what's called the Dao. And in that sense, then the Tao is made up of yin and yang. Yin and yang are pretty unique ideas. They're not always the Taiji fish, right? So I'm sure that many of you or all of you are familiar with the idea of Taiji or Tai Chi being like one big, white fish and one big black fish, and then each of them have a dot of the other inside of them. So the white has black in it and the black has white in it. And this is, according to the American understanding of the Tao, is supposed to symbolize how all things kind of have characteristics of the opposite in them. All good contains the capacity for evil, and all evil contains the capacity for good, and so on. I'm not saying it's a wrong interpretation at all. It's the popular one. So the Tao generates yin and yang, right? So the Tao is beyond yin and yang, but it generates them, and it generates these also two states which are called the non-being and being, right? Wu and yo. So non-being and being. And so all of reality is understood to be sort of some structure of being and non-being. The Confucians take yin and yang way farther than Taoism. The Confucians have a way more, in the early days and even toward like the Song dynasty, they have a way more advanced understanding of yin and yang and Taiji and these things than the Taoists. And the Taoists borrow a lot from them. But in the early days, the Dao De Jing talks a lot more about non-being and being, emptiness and fullness, etc. This is what the Tao creates, but the Tao itself is untouched by those things. Much, much, much later, people start saying the Tao is Wuji Lao Mu, right? Wuji, the utmost of non-being, Lao Mu, ancient mother. And so the idea is it's the thing that even predates the utmost of non-being. But that's a substantially later interpretation. So in the early days, Dao De Jing, right, Dao is this first movement that spits out reality. But we can go several layers deeper with this. So more or less how it is chuo. Oh no, moving everything around. Okay, chuo basically is still chuo. Okay, it's always carrying from one place to another. Here, shou, this character gets complicated. So this part on the bottom here is zi. Zi means self, but zi, it can also mean spontaneous, or it can also mean automatic, or this kind of idea. And so zi, as spontaneous, the Tao is a spontaneous action which generates nature and which continually generates nature. It's not that it doesn't stop, right? It keeps generating nature. So that's the zi part of Tao, the self or the spontaneous part. The top part, oops, sorry about that. So the top section here, these two dots, are often said to be sun and moon, sun on the left and moon on the right. Um, Now, I don't want to get into huge complication about this. Um, one of the greatest texts about this subject is Tan Tong Qi. It explains that the sun and the moon are they're really good examples of how yang contains yin and yin contains yang. Right, the sun is said to contain yin within its center, whereas the moon is said to contain yang within its center. Um, but this is not something we need to go into today. It's a different topic. But we have sun and moon. And why do we have sun and moon? And why would they be associated with a thoroughfare and spontaneity? It's because every day, every night, you have the sun, rising in the morning, so to speak, and you have the moon rising at night, and the sun sets in the evening and the moon sets in the morning. So the sun and moon are this constant which spontaneously are present and waxing and waning and doing their thing, right? The moon wanes, it waxes from the 1st to the 15th or 16th day of the lunar month, and then it wanes from like the 16th to the 30th day of the lunar month. And it goes through an entire phase where it goes from being totally black and not able to be seen to being totally full and bright. This is considered to be one aspect of the transformation of yin and yang, which is measured in periods of 30 days. On the other hand, the sun, it's measured in a period of a single day, because there are 24 hours in a day, or according to the medieval Chinese clock, there's 12 shi or 12 time periods. And so the sun is, rising and falling every day. And so you can see it's waxing and waning throughout the day and the night. Well, especially through the day, I guess. And then in the year, also, the whole year also describes one rotation of the sun, in a sense, because the sun in the summer solstice, I'm filming very relatively close to the winter solstice right now, but the sun in the summer solstice it's already reached its maximum state, so it starts to decline. And then by the winter solstice, it reaches its minimum state, right? It's like here in Ontario, Canada, it's getting dark at like 5 or 5:30 right now. What a bummer. At least we have snowboarding, though. Compared to BC, it's nothing. Anyway, back on topic. So the sun and the moon are seemingly perpetual iterations of this yin-yang concept, and they move seemingly spontaneously. They're carried. What are they carried by, right? Now, the thing you have to understand is that medieval Chinese thinkers, although they had excellent access to astronomical data, they hadn't conceptualized the universe in the way we have today. If you were to explain the universe to them, I think they'd be quite shocked. But they'd conceptualize the idea that there's a canopy of stars, and they'd conceptualize the idea that there's the heavens and the earth, and that there's the sun and moon. And they have a naturalistic philosophy, which was acceptable for their period. We know too much now. We know too much. Anyway, so then Dao is seen as the thing that put all this into motion initially. And it's considered to be very, very powerful, but totally intangible and invisible, because all we see in the world is the evidence of how things are created. And this is the evidence comes from how we judge life, essentially. A seed develops an invisible sprout within it, and when the sprout is mature enough to push through the seed, it pushes through the seed and it opens, and you have a baby plant, right? And it grows. So this original invisible, intangible energy had to be created from somewhere. And so this is one way the Tao is applied. Another way is, like a zygote or an embryo appearing inside of a mother's womb. They understood that the father's, essence in the mother's blood, so to speak. This is how they would have couched it, especially in the old internal alchemy documents. They understood that this is what produces fetus. But what about the time before they came together, right? Then there was no fetus, right? It hadn't yet existed. And so this thing seems to be like an alchemy or something. It comes together, almost by invisible magic. And so this is another instance of how people could come to understand that there's a pre-creation state, and they call that Tao. That's the basic idea. And so sun and moon above are sustained by this automatic carrying movement that always continually regenerates every aspect of reality and makes it fresh and new constantly. And so the Tao is seen as this very pivotal philosophical concept which explains how reality keeps going, right? How it was created and how it keeps going. So this is seen as a very good thing. And then finally, there's one last little section, which is right here. It's the number one, E. So the number one represents how all of this, the movement of the sun and moon, heaven and earth, this spontaneous activity, all of us, right? They all come together, and it's all this organic, constant whole, which is a kind of oneness. And so even in the character Dao, you can see that there's this value of unity, this value of spontaneity, this value of acting without any forced action. That's the basic concept of Tao. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful idea. Really nice. Anyway, so let's move on to De, virtue. So I just took some pictures off the internet. Like I don't want to go into the etymology too much because number one, I am not a professional etymologist. Number two, or a sinologist for that matter. Number two, I think is excessive sometimes for a casual conversation like this. But we can talk a little bit about the structure of De. So De means virtue. On the left side, this character I think is pronounced chur. Again, it implies a kind of movement. It's half of the character xing, which means to walk or to move. There's a number of different ways to view this top section. It can be viewed as zhi, the character zhi, which means direct. But many people, like many, throughout history and, various experts and stuff, they understand this part here to be an I, the character mu, which means to see. And then on the bottom part here, xin means heart, right? So the heart means like your emotions or your conscious awareness as it expresses itself. Xin is in internal alchemy thought is part of a sort of a tripartite structure of consciousness, where the initial basis of consciousness is called yuanshan, or the original spirit. It's an intangible thing which is generated in us when we're in gestation, and it doesn't have any of its own movement. It's always still and always sort of open, allowing for the rest of consciousness to occur. The second layer is called shirshan, or perceptual consciousness, and that layer of consciousness is that which we experience the world with effectively, right? It's where all of our different mental states happen, and it's what we would normally think of as awareness. And then we have a third one, which is xin, which means heart, right? Which is this character, and that's like the way that the mind manifests feelings and the basis for thought and all these things. And xin, if you're a martial artist, xin generates yi, right? Xin, heart generates mind, right? And then mind acts as the emissary of the heart to go out and do its bidding. And so when we look at the character De, right, we have a movement, we have a sense of directness, we have an I, which is viewing the heart. And this might be the character 1. Okay, so the idea here is that if you want to be a virtuous person, you want to be a moral person or a decent person, right, then you will use your inner eye, you'll use your inner awareness to observe the activity, the movement of your heart. You will pay attention to how you feel and how you think about things and how that influences your actions. And if you can do that, then there's a very good chance that you will follow those excellent values, like doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, and being kind and benevolent and so on and so forth. And that would make you a person who has De, right? A person who has virtue. which is pronounced with the second tone, which is an upward inflection. I'm not so good at getting my upward inflection and my downward and upward inflections straight. But the good news is when I speak in Chinese, I can usually be understood contextually at least. So that's the basis of De, right? It's virtue, and it's how we practice virtue by actually making an inward observation of ourselves. But of course, you can use this concept to observe outwardly to understand other people's virtue as well, right? And then the last one is Jing, and as I mentioned, we're not going to go into this too much. It's Jing in this instance means treatise or a classical document. I think we can leave that one there. So in totality, we have Dao De Jing, right? So how do we interpret this? Well, the Tao is this self-according creator of reality that puts the motion of the sun and moon, ergo, cold, hot, damp, dry, night, day, all of these characteristics that we think of as environmental into motion. And this is supportive of life, it's supportive of us, right? And so we understand Tao in that context. It's a movement of the leader. And then De is about how we become virtuous people by making inner observation and outer observation about the state of our heart, or our emotions, our reactions, and how we act on those things. And then Jing, of course, is a document, right? So Dao De Jing is a document which is about how to align this virtuous observation of our own inner characters with the Tao, with this forerunner of nature. And so the text is, these old texts, the names are extremely important. You can look at, Yin Fu Jing is another good example, right? Yin Fu, hidden talisman, right? So there's something which is hidden or concealed, but has a lot of spiritual power, right? Hidden talisman, classic. All of these old texts, their names usually tell you something about what's going on in the text, and Dao De Jing is no different. So often, people in the past and present have broken it up into two books, two texts. One is the Dao Jing, and one is the De Jing, right? The way classic and the virtue classic, right? And if you can understand it through that prism or not, right? I mean, we're not talking about the Taoist religion here. We're not even, I would love to tell you about internal alchemy, which has its own rules, but the Dao De Jing is a cultural document, and it's a Taoist cultural document, but there's a wide variety of interpretations of it. It's not only one interpretation, and everything that I told you about the structures of the characters, by the way, is also open to interpretation. Ideally, it's interpretation which is based on reality. You wouldn't want to say that you could, but you wouldn't want to say that this character means giraffe, because that it wouldn't have anything to do with the text, right? But if you you find a way to interpret it differently that adds something valuable to the conversation, why not, right? Or you just interpret it differently because that's your way of viewing it, and you don't contribute to the conversation, that's fine too. But this was one way of seeing it. It's one way of seeing it. And so when you read the Dao De Jing, then you can keep this, you can attend in your mind to this idea that you're reading a text which is about observing how nature operates in an automatic and spontaneous way, and how that leads to all of these phenomena that you can give names to. But the function, the key function that makes it all rotate, the true center of it, is totally intangible. And then at the same time, you observe your inner landscape and the social landscape around you, and you draw conclusions about the relationship between that spontaneity of this nameless natural fountainhead and all of the things that it causes to happen in reality, and your own action in the world. And then, ideally, this teaches you to have actions which are not only more moral or more ethical, right? They're directly beneficial to, your happiness, your sense of freedom, your longevity, and many, many, many other areas. It's a very, very profound idea. That's, in my opinion, that's what the Dao De Jing is about. And then beyond that, in subsequent generations, people have made it into many other things, right? I like internal alchemy meditation. Some people like ritual Taoism, but the Dao De Jing as a classic and Tao and virtue as concepts go far, far, far beyond those things. I mentioned martial arts, right? Martial artists apply Taoism to their martial arts practice sometimes. Feng shui, right? Calligraphy, tea ceremony, for goodness sake, right? There's so much to it. So that's why I want to do 81 months of the Dao De Jing. We're going to go back to the little cover here. My cute little ChatGPT picture. And I'll wrap it up here. 30 minutes. That was a long time. If you stuck around, congratulations and thank you. Why not subscribe to my channel? It's not much, but hopefully it helps. And then beyond that, if you're interested, you can look at my Substack. I write a lot about internal alchemy there, but I write about other subjects too. And I'm going to be writing probably more articles than I make videos on average, I would say, about the Dao De Jing. I prefer writing. I'm not a great writer, but I find it easier than making videos. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the future. And if you want, I also put the link to the first chapter program below. I'm doing it through Gumroad. It's a paid product. At the time of recording this video, which is the 8th of November 2025, we're just about to do the second lecture, which is about the Wang Bi and the Heshang Gong annotations. And then this program will go until December, and then we'll do the second chapter and so on and so forth. But those will all be separate programs. I've broken it up like this in order, number one, to make it so that people don't have to dedicate themselves to like 6.5 years of study. That's really a lot. I should dedicate myself to it, but you guys are welcome to come and go as you like. And also to be able to structure this so that later I can make a website for this featuring the whole project, which will have chapters or sections associated with it, which will go from 1 to 81. And then those translations, once they're firmed up, and this free media that I'm making can be posted there, but then also you'll be able to click through to the links for the individual chapter courses again, which will consist of 4 parts, and you'll be able to get them at your leisure should you wish to do so. I think it's a cool program. The friends who are taking it with me so far have also been quite positive about it. But as always, I leave it with you because, of course, just as the word "duh" implies, there, our appreciation of what's good and what's not good is very much in the eye of the beholder. Okay, lots of love, and see you again soon.